My name is Elena Rodriguez, and 6 months ago, I was nobody special in this world of extraordinary wealth and power. At least, that's exactly what I believed about myself every single morning when I woke up in my tiny two-bedroom apartment above my small bakery in the working-class neighborhood of Riverside. The smell of fresh bread and pastries was my alarm clock, and the constant worry about paying rent was my daily companion. I'd inherited the little bakery from my grandmother 3 years ago, along with her recipes, her ancient ovens, and unfortunately her mounting debts that seemed to grow larger every month despite my best efforts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Every day felt like a battle I was slowly losing. I would wake up at 4 in the morning to start the day's baking, work until 8 at night serving customers, then spend another 2 hours doing paperwork and trying to figure out how to stretch every dollar until it screamed. My 8-year-old daughter Lucia was the light of my life, but I could see the questions in her innocent brown eyes when she asked why we couldn't afford the things her classmates had, why we shopped at thrift stores, why Mommy always looked so tired and worried. The truth was devastating and simple. We were one emergency away from losing everything. One broken oven, one slow month, one unexpected expense, and we'd be out on the street. I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating numbers that never seemed to add up to enough. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me like a physical force, making it hard to breathe sometimes. But I refused to give up because Lucia deserved better. And deep in my heart, I still believed that hard work and treating people with kindness would eventually pay off, even when the evidence suggested otherwise. That Tuesday morning started exactly like every other morning for the past 3 years. I was in my bakery kitchen by 4:30, my hands already covered in flour as I kneaded dough for the day's bread. The early morning quiet was my favorite time. Just me, my thoughts, and the therapeutic rhythm of baking that my grandmother had taught me was like meditation. I was pulling a tray of cinnamon rolls from the oven when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice that greeted me was crisp, professional, and carried the kind of authority that immediately made me stand up straighter even though no one could see me. "Good morning. Is this Elena Rodriguez of Rodriguez Family Bakery?" the woman asked with an accent that screamed expensive education and exclusive social circles. "Yes, this is Elena," I replied, wiping flour from my hands and wondering if this was another creditor calling about overdue payments. "My name is Victoria Ashworth from Prestige Planning, the premier event coordination company for high society occasions. We have an extremely urgent and exclusive request that could be quite lucrative for your establishment." Prestige Planning? I'd heard whispers about them in the local business community. They handled events for celebrities, politicians, and billionaires, the kind of people who thought nothing of spending more on flowers than I made in 6 months. Why on earth would they be calling my little neighborhood bakery? "I think you might have the wrong number," I said carefully. "My bakery is pretty small. We mainly do birthday cakes and morning pastries for the local community." "There's no mistake, Mrs. Rodriguez. We specifically sought you out based on a recommendation from someone who attended the charity fundraiser at St. Mary's Community Center last month. Do you remember providing desserts for that event?" I remembered it vividly. The community center had been raising money for their after-school program, and I'd donated 3 dozen of my grandmother's famous Trileche cakes and an assortment of pastries. It had cost me nearly $200 in ingredients I couldn't really afford, but seeing the joy on those children's faces and knowing I was helping fund programs that kept kids safe after school made every penny worth it. "Yes, I remember," I said, my heart beginning to race with possibility. "Well, it seems your desserts made quite an impression on someone very important who was in attendance that evening. We have a client getting married this Saturday, James Whitmore. Perhaps you've heard the name?" James Whitmore. Even I, living in my small world of flour and financial struggles, knew that name. He was one of the youngest billionaires in the country, having built a technology empire that revolutionized how people communicate globally. His engagement to socialite Scarlett Pemberton had been front-page news in every gossip magazine and entertainment show for months. "The wedding will be held at the Whitmore family estate in Hillcrest Heights," Victoria continued, and I nearly dropped the phone. Hillcrest Heights was where the ultra-wealthy lived behind massive gates and security systems, in mansions that looked like palaces. The budget for desserts and specialty baked goods is $75,000. $75,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. That was more money than I'd made in the entire previous year. That was enough to pay off my debts, fix the broken equipment in my kitchen, maybe even put some money aside for Lucia's college fund that I'd dreamed about but never been able to start. "Mrs. Rodriguez, are you still there?" "Yes, I'm here," I managed to whisper. Are you absolutely certain you want my bakery? This is a very important event, and I'm sure there are much more established." "Our client was very specific," Victoria interrupted. "They want authenticity, heart, and the kind of genuine care that goes into every creation. They said your tres leche cake reminded them of something precious from their past, something that represented real love and family tradition rather than expensive showmanship." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Real love and family tradition. Those words resonated deep in my soul, because that's exactly what my baking had always been about. Every recipe was a connection to my grandmother. Every cake was made with the same care I'd put into Lucia's birthday treats. Every pastry was infused with the hope that it would bring someone a moment of pure joy. "I need an answer quickly," Victoria pressed. "The wedding is in 4 days, which doesn't give us much time for preparation. Can you handle an order of this magnitude?" I thought about Lucia, about the stack of bills on my kitchen counter, about the dream I'd almost given up on of building something meaningful with my grandmother's legacy. "Yes," I said before I could lose my nerve. "Yes, I can absolutely handle this." "Excellent. I'll email you the complete details within the hour." "Mrs. Rodriguez, this could be a life-changing opportunity for your business if everything goes perfectly. Mr. Whitmore's wedding will be covered by every major media outlet. The exposure alone could transform your bakery's future." Quote. After I hung up, I stood in my empty bakery, surrounded by the familiar smells of bread and sugar, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the break I'd been praying for. Maybe all those nights of worry and all those days of barely scraping by had been leading to this moment. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind of planning, shopping, and baking that pushed every limit of my small operation. I called in favors from other local bakers, rented additional equipment, and worked 18-hour days to create what I knew had to be absolutely perfect. The order was massive. A 5-tier wedding cake that would serve 400 guests, 300 individual petit fours in 6 different flavors, chocolate fountains with homemade truffles, and an entire dessert bar featuring my grandmother's most treasured recipes. Every creation had to be flawless because I understood that this wasn't just about money. This was about proving that someone like me, someone without connections or inherited advantages, could compete at the highest level through pure skill and dedication. This was my chance to show the world that genuine passion and authentic craftsmanship could hold their own against any expensive, pretentious alternative. Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather that seemed designed for a fairy tale wedding. I loaded my van with what felt like 1,000 pounds of carefully crafted desserts, double-checking every detail because I knew there would be no second chances. The drive to Hillcrest Heights took me through neighborhoods that became progressively more exclusive, until I was traveling roads lined with estates that looked like they belonged in European castles rather than suburban America. The Whitmore estate was beyond anything I could have imagined. The main house rose from perfectly manicured grounds like something from a movie about royalty. All stone columns and crystal windows that reflected the morning sun like jewels. Gardens that probably employed a dozen full-time groundskeepers stretched as far as I could see, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the peaceful sound of fountains that probably cost more than my entire building. I followed the service road to the back entrance as instructed, where uniformed staff members were already bustling around with the efficient precision of a military operation. A woman with a clipboard and the kind of severe expression that suggested she tolerated no nonsense directed me to the service entrance with barely a glance. "Dessert vendor?" she asked in a tone that made it clear I was expected to know my place in the hierarchy. "Yes, Elena Rodriguez from Rodriguez Family Bakery." She checked her clipboard with the intensity of someone conducting national security clearance. "You're to set up in the main ballroom. Follow the staff corridors. Don't interact with guests. And stay out of sight during the ceremony. The family has very strict policies about maintaining appropriate boundaries." The service corridors were like a hidden world beneath the glamorous surface, filled with staff members who moved with practiced invisibility. I wheeled my carefully packed desserts through hallways that were nicer than most people's living rooms, following signs until I emerged into the main ballroom and felt my breath catch in my throat. The space was absolutely magnificent. Crystal chandeliers that probably weighed more than my car hung from a ceiling painted with scenes that belonged in an art museum. The marble floors were so perfectly polished, they created mirror-like reflections of everything above. Tables set for 400 guests stretched across the room, each one decorated with flowers that I was certain cost more than most people's monthly salary. But what struck me most wasn't the obvious wealth. It was the beauty of it all, the way every detail had been chosen to create something truly magical. This was the kind of setting where fairy tales came to life, where dreams became reality, where two people could promise to love each other forever, surrounded by absolute perfection. I spent the morning transforming my designated corner into what I hoped would be a dessert display worthy of the surroundings. Every cake, every truffle, every petit four was positioned with the same care an artist uses arranging a gallery exhibition. This wasn't just food. This was my art, my family's legacy, my chance to prove that passion and authenticity could create something just as beautiful as unlimited money. That's when I first encountered her, Scarlett Pemberton, the bride who would soon become Mrs. James Whitmore. She swept into the ballroom like she owned not just the room but the entire world, and in many ways, she probably did. Tall, platinum blonde, and stunning in the way that unlimited resources can create, she wore a pre-wedding outfit that probably cost more than I'd make in several months. But it wasn't her obvious beauty or expensive clothes that struck me. It was the cold calculation in her eyes as she surveyed everything around her like a general inspecting troops. She approached my dessert display with the expression of someone examining something potentially defective, her perfectly manicured fingers trailing along the edge of my table as she studied my work with obvious skepticism. "So you're the local baker everyone's been talking about," she said without any pretense of warmth or politeness. Her voice carried the kind of entitled edge that suggested she'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Elena Rodriguez. I hope everything meets your expectations for your special day." She picked up one of my petite fours, examining it like she was looking for flaws, then set it down with a dismissive gesture that made my heart sink. "I suppose they'll have to do." James insisted on this authentic touch. Personally, I would have preferred Delacroix from Paris, but apparently we needed to support local business for some reason. Local business. The way she said it made it sound like charity work, like I was some unfortunate creature she was being forced to help out of obligation, rather than someone who had earned this opportunity through skill and reputation. "I've put a lot of care into every item," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "These recipes have been in my family for generations." "How quaint," she replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "Just try to stay out of the way during the reception. Our guests are accustomed to a certain level of sophistication. We wouldn't want them to feel uncomfortable." The message was crystal clear. Know your place, stay invisible, and don't embarrass us by reminding anyone that we had to hire someone from outside their exclusive world. I watched her glide away, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a countdown timer, and felt a familiar knot form in my stomach. This was exactly the kind of treatment I'd experienced my entire life from people who thought money made them inherently better than everyone else. But then something wonderful happened that gave me hope that not everyone in this world was like Scarlett Pemberton. I was making final adjustments to the wedding cake when a quiet voice behind me said, "It's absolutely beautiful." I turned to find a man in his early 30s, dressed in an elegant but understated suit that suggested wealth without needing to shout about it. He had kind eyes, a genuine smile, and something about his presence immediately put me at ease in a way that seemed almost impossible in this intimidating environment. "Thank you so much," I replied, uncertain who he was but grateful for the first kind words I'd heard all morning. "I'm James," he said, extending his hand with the kind of natural courtesy that can't be taught or bought. "The incredibly nervous groom who's trying not to panic about the next few hours." My heart nearly stopped beating. This was James Whitmore, the billionaire whose wedding I was catering. The man whose story had been splashed across every magazine cover for months. But standing here in person, he seemed completely different from what I'd expected. There was nothing arrogant or intimidating about him, just genuine warmth and what appeared to be actual nervousness about his upcoming ceremony. "I'm Elena Rodriguez," I managed, hoping my voice didn't betray how starstruck I felt. "I really hope everything is exactly what you wanted for your special day." "It's more than perfect," he said, and something in his tone made me believe he truly meant it. "Thank you for making this day so special. I know this was short notice, and I really appreciate you going above and beyond." There was something strangely familiar about him, something that tugged at the edges of my memory in a way I couldn't quite identify. Had I seen him somewhere before? But before I could explore that feeling further, Scarlett appeared at his side, like an elegant predator claiming her territory. "James, darling," she said, slipping her arm through his with possessive precision, "you shouldn't be bothering the help. We have 300 guests arriving soon, and you still need to get ready." The help. The phrase hit me like a slap, but what bothered me more was the way James's expression changed when she spoke. The warmth in his eyes dimmed slightly, replaced by something that looked almost like resignation. "Of course," he said quietly, but he glanced back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Thank you again, Elena. Everything looks incredible." Quote. As Scarlett led him away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just witnessed something important, though I had no idea what it meant or why it mattered. The ceremony began at exactly 3 o'clock, with the kind of precision that only unlimited resources can achieve. I watched from my designated corner in the ballroom, staying invisible as instructed while 400 of the country's most powerful and influential people took their seats. The guest list read like a who's who of American wealth and influence: tech moguls, entertainment industry titans, political figures, and old money families whose names had been synonymous with power for generations. As the string quartet began playing, I found myself genuinely moved by the beauty of the moment. Whatever my personal feelings about Scarlett might be, there was something undeniably magical about watching two people promise to spend their lives together surrounded by such elegant perfection. The flower arrangements were breathtaking, the music was hauntingly beautiful, and the late afternoon sunlight streaming through the massive windows created an almost ethereal atmosphere. But as I observed the ceremony more closely, I began to notice things that troubled me. James looked uncomfortable throughout the entire proceeding, his smile seeming forced and his eyes constantly scanning the crowd as if he was searching for something or someone. During the exchange of vows, when he should have been focused entirely on his bride, he kept glancing toward the staff area where I was stationed. His responses to the minister's questions were correct, but lacked the joy and enthusiasm you'd expect from a man marrying the love of his life. Scarlett, on the other hand, played her part perfectly. She radiated confidence and satisfaction, her smile never wavering, as she basked in the attention of 400 witnesses to her triumph. But even her performance felt calculated, more like an actress playing a role than a woman experiencing one of the most meaningful moments of her life. She posed for the photographers with practiced precision, ensuring every angle captured her at her most flattering, and her responses to the vows sounded rehearsed rather than heartfelt. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was polite and sustained, but somehow it felt hollow to me. Maybe I was projecting my own discomfort with Scarlett onto the situation, but something about the entire ceremony felt more like a business transaction than a celebration of love. These weren't two people who couldn't wait to start their lives together. This felt like the formalization of a merger between two powerful entities. As the guests moved from the ceremony space to the garden reception area, I busied myself with final preparations for the dessert service. The evening reception would be the real test of my work, when 400 discriminating palates would judge whether a small neighborhood baker belonged in their exclusive world. I arranged and rearranged every display, checked and rechecked every detail, and tried to calm the nervous energy that had been building throughout the day. The garden reception area was even more spectacular than the indoor ceremony space. Thousands of tiny lights had been strung through ancient oak trees, creating a canopy of stars that transformed the evening into something magical. Tables draped in the finest linens were scattered throughout the space, each one perfectly positioned to take advantage of the romantic ambiance. A live orchestra played softly from a raised platform, and uniformed servers moved through the crowd with champagne and hors d'oeuvre that looked like tiny works of art. I watched from the periphery as the guests mingled and celebrated, noting the easy confidence with which they navigated their privileged world. These were people who had never worried about paying rent, never stressed about whether they could afford to fix a broken appliance, never stayed awake at night calculating whether they had enough money to buy groceries and pay utilities in the same month. Their problems were different: which vacation home to visit for the holidays, whether to buy the yacht or the private jet, how to manage the inconvenience of having too much money to spend efficiently. But as I observed more carefully, I began to see beneath the surface glamour to the complex social dynamics at play. There were subtle hierarchies within the guest list, carefully orchestrated conversations that were more about networking than genuine connection, and an underlying competitiveness that turned even casual interactions into opportunities for social positioning. This wasn't just a wedding reception. It was a gathering of people who viewed everything, including social relationships, as opportunities for advancement or displays of status. The dessert service began at 9 o'clock, and I felt my heart rate increase as guests approached my carefully crafted display. This was the moment of truth, when months of financial struggle and days of intensive preparation would be judged by people whose standards had been set by the finest restaurants and pastry chefs in the world. My grandmother's recipes would be evaluated by Pilates, accustomed to Michelin-starred cuisine and $500 bottles of wine. But something wonderful began to happen that filled me with pride and vindication. Guest after guest approached the dessert table with polite skepticism, only to have their expressions change to genuine surprise and delight after tasting my creations. I heard whispered conversations about the incredible authenticity of the tres leches cake, the perfect balance of the chocolate truffles, and the nostalgic comfort of desserts that reminded them of childhood memories they'd forgotten they had. One elderly gentleman, who I later learned was a federal judge, spent 10 minutes at my display sampling different items and asking detailed questions about my techniques and ingredients. A famous actress whose movies I'd watched dozens of times complimented me on creating desserts that felt both elegant enough for the occasion and genuine enough to evoke real emotional connections. Even some of the most intimidating socialites, women whose approval could make or break reputations in certain circles, grudgingly admitted that my work exceeded their expectations. For the first time since arriving at the estate, I began to feel like I truly belonged in this space. My desserts weren't just adequate substitutes for more expensive alternatives. They were genuinely superior in ways that mattered. They had heart, soul, and the kind of authentic craftsmanship that no amount of money could buy. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I had earned my place at this table through merit rather than charity. That's when disaster struck in the most unexpected way possible. I was carrying a crystal serving platter to refresh one of the dessert displays when a gentleman backing away from a conversation stepped directly into my path. There was no time to stop, no way to avoid the collision, and no possibility of maintaining my balance while carrying the heavy platter. The crystal shattered against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, sending fragments scattering across the reception area and causing every conversation to stop mid-sentence. 400 pairs of eyes turned toward me as I stood frozen in horror, blood trickling down my hand where a shard had cut me, surrounded by the glittering remains of what had probably been an expensive piece of servingware. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could feel the weight of all that attention, all that judgment, all that barely concealed disdain for the outsider who had just proven she didn't belong in their perfect world. My cheeks burned with embarrassment as I realized I had become exactly what Scarlett had warned against. A reminder that they had been forced to hire someone who wasn't sophisticated enough to navigate their refined environment without causing problems. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, dropping to my knees to begin collecting the larger pieces of crystal. "I'll clean this up immediately and replace anything that was damaged." But as I knelt there, bleeding and humiliated, I became aware that the silence had taken on a different quality. It wasn't just the pause of people processing an unexpected incident. It was the electric tension that precedes a confrontation. I looked up to see Scarlett approaching with an expression of fury that made my blood run cold. She had been holding court with a group of influential women when the crystal broke, basking in their attention and admiration as the radiant new bride. The interruption had clearly ruined whatever moment she had been orchestrating, and her anger at having her perfect evening disrupted was written across her face in unmistakable terms. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, her voice carrying across the garden with enough volume to ensure that everyone could hear every word. "Do you have any idea how much that piece cost? Do you have any conception of how inappropriate it is to disrupt my reception with your clumsiness? The crowd pressed closer, some looking uncomfortable with the public confrontation but none willing to intervene. Others seemed genuinely entertained by the drama, as if they were watching a performance designed for their amusement. I realized with growing horror that I had become the evening's unexpected entertainment, the hired help being put in her place for the satisfaction of people who would go home with stories about the time they witnessed real social justice being administered. It was an accident, I said, trying to keep my voice steady while continuing to collect crystal fragments. Someone stepped backward and I couldn't avoid. An accident? Scarlett's voice rose to a near shriek. This is exactly what I was afraid of when James insisted on hiring you. This is what happens when you bring people into an environment where they don't belong. The words hit me like physical blows. Don't belong. The phrase echoed everything I'd felt throughout my entire life. Every moment when I'd been made to feel inferior because of my economic circumstances. Every time I'd been dismissed or looked down upon by people who confused wealth with worth. I stood slowly, crystal fragments still clutched in my bleeding hand, and faced the woman who was systematically destroying what should have been one of the proudest moments of my professional life. Around us, 400 witnesses watched, with the kind of fascination people reserve for car accidents and public humiliations. I understand you're upset, I said, fighting to maintain my dignity in the face of her assault. I'll take full responsibility for any damage and make sure everything is cleaned up properly. Responsibility? Scarlett laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Do you think paying for one broken platter makes up for ruining my reception? Do you think apologizing fixes the embarrassment you've caused me in front of my guests? She stepped closer, and I could see the calculated cruelty in her eyes. This wasn't just about a broken platter or even about the disruption to her reception. This was about power, about establishing hierarchies, about ensuring that everyone present understood exactly where I stood in her world order. Let me make something very clear to you, she continued, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper that somehow carried even more menace than her earlier shouting. You are here to serve. You are not here to mingle, to be noticed, or to pretend that you belong among your betters. You are here because we needed someone to provide a service. And now you've proven that even that simple task is beyond your capabilities. Quote, the crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word of her systematic humiliation. Some faces showed discomfort with the cruelty they were witnessing, but others displayed satisfaction, as if justice was finally being served to someone who had forgotten her place. I may come from a different background, I said quietly, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice, but I work hard, I treat people with respect, and I take pride in what I do. I'm sorry about the accident, but I won't apologize for who I am or where I come from. The words seemed to hang in the air like a challenge, and I immediately realized I had made a terrible mistake. Scarlett's face transformed with rage, her careful composure cracking to reveal something genuinely frightening underneath. How dare you, she hissed. How dare you speak to me like that? How dare you stand there and lecture me about respect when you've just humiliated me in front of 400 of the most important people in the country? I saw her hand rising before I fully understood what was happening. Time seemed to slow as I watched her arm arc through the air with deadly precision, aimed directly at my face. The slap connected with enough force to send me stumbling backward, my vision blurring as pain exploded across my cheek. The crystal platter I'd been holding fell from my numb fingers, shattering against the marble with another sound like breaking glass. Blood from my cut hand mixed with tears I could no longer hold back as I touched my burning cheek in disbelief. 400 people stared at me in complete silence. Some looked shocked by the violence they had just witnessed. Others appeared satisfied that appropriate punishment had been delivered, and still others seemed excited by the drama they were witnessing firsthand. Scarlett stood over me, breathing hard, her hand still raised as if she was considering delivering another blow. Maybe now you'll remember your place, she said, her voice carrying across the silent garden like a pronouncement of judgment. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare and find myself back in my small bakery, surrounded by the familiar smells of bread and sugar, safe from the cruelty of people who had confused wealth with the right to treat others as less than human. But then something extraordinary happened that changed everything I thought I understood about power, justice, and the complex connections that bind our lives together in ways we never expect. Stop. The voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a blade. James had appeared at the edge of the crowd, and for the first time since I'd met him, he looked truly angry. That's enough, Scarlett. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.